Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Talk of Fame podcast. I'm Kaya Montigny. We're so excited to have Karen Kosowski joining us today. Karen is a versatile multi-genre writer and producer based in Nashville, Tennessee. Raised on a variety of pop, rock, classical, and country music in a Canadian prairie city, Winnipeg, in the early 2000s, she packed up her car and drove herself, her instruments, and her recording gear to Toronto, where she spent many years creating both pop and country music before following her heart and relocating her studio to Nashville, Tennessee. With her formal musical training, traditional songwriting background, multi-instrumental abilities, and varied influences in 2 decades of producing, pop programming, and engineering skills, she's a virtual Swiss Army knife in both the writing room and recording studio. As such, she has combined, contributed to a wide range of resume of hits, sometimes as a producer, sometimes as a writer, sometimes as a mixer, and sometimes all three at once. Welcome to the show, Karen. I'm so excited to welcome you and so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you kind of tell us about like your early musical influences growing up in Winnipeg?
Yeah, growing up in Winnipeg, I don't think I really realized that there were some influences that I was hearing that maybe people especially outside of Canada, weren't hearing. So like, obviously I had all the American artists still. I was listening to rock and pop and 90s country and everything you can think of from that time period. I was really into the singer-songwriter stuff that was happening.
Mhm.
Everything from, Sarah McLachlan, Tori Amos, Ani DeFranco to like getting into rock stuff like Smashing Pumpkins, you
Mhm.
know, Portishead, Radiohead, Coldplay. Like I was into so many different things. And then, but I also was getting like kind of these unique Canadian influences, like the Tragically Hip
Mhm.
or Blue Rodeo, and some of these bands that, like, now having a little bit of distance, I can hear sort of something that feels quintessentially Canadian. But if you had to ask me to describe it, I'm not sure I could.
Hey, there's many ways I'm sure you could probably describe it in a Canadian way.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of A's.
I know, basically with Canadian and the US, like there's so many different like access or different areas of music that are so different, like different artists, actors, like it's so different, even though it's kind of similar industries in a way, but with the musical industry and the artists that come out of both countries, they're both so different, which is so weird because their boundaries and everything are so similar.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's definitely like stuff that we get that doesn't cross down across the border into the US. There's definitely Canadian acts that, are really well known in Canada and can fill huge rooms, but they don't play outside of Canada. Like they never really like crack the US in that same way?
I know, like they're only specifically just playing in Canada. Like they're like, okay, what's our travel to the US since it's right on the border there? Like, what's this in Canada? And people from Canada just know us from here and nowhere else. Like, what's the ticket from here at this point?
Yeah, like there's this awesome band that I grew up on called Sloan, and they're from the East Coast of Canada. And I feel like they were a cross between like the Who and the Beatles.
Mm,
And I loved their stuff. I have no idea why they never cracked a bigger market than Canada.
I
It's a shame.
know. If you're big like the Beatles, then you should get a wider audience. Because with how big the Beatles are, like everyone in every country has to like the Beatles if you're similar. But in terms of like Canada and that industry, like did you ever picture yourself moving into the US and performing in the US, or did you kind of just picture yourself just doing stuff in Canada like many different artists in Canada do?
I mean, as a songwriter and music maker in general, you always want to reach the largest audience for your music. So I think I always was open to the idea of moving somewhere else. And It was many years ago already, like over a decade ago, that I started taking trips to the US, and just, going for a couple weeks to LA and writing a bunch of songs with people and going to London, England and writing with people.
Ooh, jealous. I'm
Yeah.
so jealous.
Yeah. I just tried out, various cities and was trying to figure out where was the right fit. And, yeah, it was just all in the interest of trying to reach a bigger audience and feeling like, I was in Canada. And as much as I absolutely love Canada, it's difficult sometimes to get your music heard outside of the country. I've had radio topping hits on Canadian country radio, and no one knows about it down here.
Like it's only Canada's a wide known audience and it's only sticking to Canada. Like that's the problem is that like when you live in the US, it's probably more likely you will reach wider audiences than maybe living in London or Canada. Like with those type of countries, it's very hard to get a wider audience compared to US because there's so many cities in the US, like maybe Nashville, LA, New York, is that like you are home in many different cities that like you have tons of choices rather than just sticking to maybe one place like Los Angeles.
Yeah, very true.
So can you kind of share more about the schools and programs in Winnipeg that had a significant impact in your musical development? Because with the schools in the US and Canada, they're so different, and I'm curious to see how that school everything like is was like for you in Canada.
Yeah, I was really lucky to attend both junior high and, well, I guess all elementary school, junior high, high school. I feel like I lucked out in having schools that were very strong in their arts programs. Um, I was involved with choirs and bands and jazz bands and after school wind ensembles and musicals, school musicals, like performances, any kind of performing arts things like that. I kind of just tried to immerse myself in everything. And I think that was just so fantastic because it gave me a really wide range of experiences. Prior to or outside of formal school, I was trained in piano. I took private piano lessons
Mhm.
my whole life, and so I had that education as well. But when I was in high school, I got exposed to so many different kinds of ensembles and musicals and choirs and things, and it just gave me such a wider experience to be able to draw on and education. It was fantastic.
Like I know, but I kind of wish I was in that area growing up for some reason. Just
Yeah.
because like when you growing up in a musical in that sort of thing, singing choir, whatever they supported, like you already know you're probably doing musical stuff in your order, theater wise, or something music. Like, I kind of wish my parents kind of exposed me to that just because I'm just like, I have nothing else better to do, could do something to do when I'm doing stuff outside of school. Like, do you think that impacted you to kind of go into the arts or?
I honestly can't remember a time in my life where music wasn't a huge part of my life. I just grew up on it. My parents put me into music lessons, kind of group music lessons when I was 4 years old. So from the ages to from 4 to 8, I was doing a lot of different like a weekly class every week with homework on a keyboard, but there was like singing and we were playing percussion instruments and we were learning how to sight read music, but it was all done in a very fun way with
Mhm.
games and activities in a group with a bunch of young kids. And then I graduated from that into private piano lessons, which enabled me to also then teach myself guitar and pick that up as a teenager. And it was always such a huge piece of my life. I just can't imagine. I mean, so I think I always assumed I would end up doing something musical.
Yeah. Especially with that experience, you're just like, well, I don't need to like suggest any other solutions to do what I'm older when I graduate high school. Like I grew up with musical stuff too, but I never like actually played or anything, or I didn't see a career in it. I played violin. I don't know how old I was. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old. I played violin. But then I was like, well, I just rather listen to music than actually playing for some reason because I'm more of a listener than playing. For some reason, I know it's like that for a lot of people, but that was something I'm just like, okay, violin is not it. Maybe it's just because that's not for me, but I never try anything after that. It's because I was lazy and just didn't seem to bother with it. But do you have a favorite instrument though?
Well, my primary instrument is the piano. I learned on that first, and so that's always my home base. I don't have to think when I'm playing on it. I can just kind of go with the emotion and not have to think about technicalities. Whereas, I picked up all the other instruments I play sort of along the way. So when I'm working on something on guitar, you know, I've been playing guitar for 30 years now. So I guess that I have some level of comfort, but I never got the kind of proficiency that I did on piano because piano is such a structured technical thing for me when I was learning it, and in lessons. But when I was a teenager, I wanted to just write songs and I wanted to be like the artist that I was listening to.
Hmm.
So and I wanted to impress my high school boyfriend. Let's be serious.
Who
So
doesn't, man? I'm
like,
like, I would too.
I
If I
know.
was
So I was like,
given.
okay, I got to learn guitar. I got to write songs on guitar. I got to start doing this.
I gotta do more things just so I can impress my dead high school boyfriend. I would do the exact same thing. Like, I don't know why, but if I was a musician, I would write all songs about my high school boyfriend at that time. That was something that I would do 100%. But to go back to piano, if I really was a musician or played an instrument, piano will be my first love. I don't know why, but with piano, it's so probably much easier and more laid back than some other instruments. And I'm sure you can add on to this as well that piano, you can just play whatever you want and just hit any keys or whatever, or just hit stuff in your mind. Compared to maybe a guitar, you have to hit so many beats and a song is much harder. Compared to piano, it's just more laid back than anything.
I think a lot of people find piano more accessible too because
Yeah.
it's very visual. Like it's so laid out in front of you logically on the keyboard. Every note is that note. And whereas on guitar, you can play the same chord in so many different positions. That I know just from talking to people who are like picking up one or the other. That's definitely an aspect of what makes it more accessible, I think.
Yeah, like with that, like there's probably more pianos out and about free to play than guitars though. Like if you like with piano, you just have it there and people can sit down and play. Like every time for me personally, every time I see a piano at places, I always sit down and play whatever I want. Even if it doesn't have to be a song, I just hit the chords just so I have something to do. I mean, who doesn't? Like everyone has a kind of like a whenever they see a piano, they just play something random. And like when you guys play guitar and piano, is there any specific songs that you like to play on guitar and piano if you guys are not doing a gig or whatever?
I mean, honestly, like I spend most of my time working up ideas for artists that I'm producing or songs that I'm writing when I'm sitting down at an instrument these days. So like, this morning I was playing around on the guitar and I was actually like, I'm I'm kind of looking for some new inspiration and new ideas. So I'm like looking up interesting chord shapes that I've never used before. And I'm kind of working those into what I'm playing so that when I'm in my next writing session, I can be kind of bringing some new inspiration to the table in that way. That's more like what I'm thinking of these days when I'm on my instruments.
I don't blame you because like whatever, even if like a musician for let's just say 20 years, you are still discovering many things that you probably didn't discover when you're probably 5 years old. Like playing different keys, maybe it's on a piano or guitar, like you might be playing guitar for how many years and still learning different guitars because there's so many guitars out there that is like it's hard to keep track of how many guitars and how to learn it and how to play it and how to interact with each song because every genre has a specific guitar I've learned.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like being a perpetual learner is really important in in this business because, as a producer, as a writer, I don't want to get stale. I always want to be thinking about how do I stay inspired. I mean, you write songs almost every day, making records. It's like I want to find something that excites me and gets me pumped up about the song that I'm writing. And sometimes that means, yeah, I got to teach myself something new that I haven't discovered yet. And
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays it's fantastic too. Like with YouTube, and there's so many like online things where you just go and check out what someone else is doing,
Hmm.
and sometimes
It's
sometimes
most likely free as well. You really don't have to spend any money for it. You can just go on YouTube.
yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, and it's just great. It's inspiring to see how someone else does something, even if it's like something I've been doing for years, but they have a different way of doing it. That can be really inspiring.
It could. Like, how do you generally find inspiration?
Well, I mean, I'm always trying to soak up, new music that's coming out. Um, but I really try to go on deep dives with the artists that I'm producing.
Mm,
Um, like Megan Patrick is a great example where
yeah.
uh, she and I have been working together for a long time. And um, leading up to this record that we did together, I really was trying to get inside her head. So I was asking her for inspiration points like, what are you listening to right now? What are you loving? And then also, what have you always loved? What have you loved as a younger person? Like what did you listen to growing up? And so I build these playlists for myself that are like inspiration playlists. And then I'll listen to that. And then, sometimes I'll even learn some of the songs on those playlists and I'll try to pick out like what is it about these songs that I like? What is it about it that the artist likes? And I find that that really informs what I bring to the table when I'm working with someone, either as a writer or a producer, because, maybe in the writing, it's just a writing session, but maybe I can play a little guitar line or a chord progression or bring up a couple sounds that kind of are influenced by that artist's loves. And then they hear that and they're like, oh, I love that. And I know why they like it. It's like this whole kind of inside baseball thing where you can't do the same thing with everyone. Everyone's unique. So
Mhm.
for me, I'm always looking for inspiration that serves, the next thing I'm working on kind of thing.
And every person is different. Like, not every person's gonna like the same thing as you do. Like, I found that whenever someone suggests a podcast or music or something, I have found that when someone suggests it, I'm more likely to listen to it because I'm always the type of person who's looking for new music to play or new podcasts to play or audiobooks or books in general. That
Mhm.
whenever I do it on my own, on my free time, I'm just like, I don't want to buy it, I don't want to listen to this. But whenever someone plays it with me, I'm just like, I'm more interested. Like you just get more like intrigued. We're always the type of people that listen to the same exact thing we're always listening to and never really discover the same exact thing. So we're never really going out of our comfort zone and actually discovering other artists compared to same big artists or maybe like Zach Brown, Taylor Swift, some other artists that everyone is playing but we never actually look at smaller artists that are going up in big right now.
Mhm.
How do you think the music community in Winnipeg has influenced your sound and artistic growth?
Well, you know, it's funny because growing up in Winnipeg, it's fairly cold in the winter, and the winters are very long. So I would say like I was fairly isolated when I was in Winnipeg, and I can't say that I was like super social in the music community. I'm a little bit of an introvert in that way. So,
I'm
and
the
I was
same
really
one.
young. So I didn't really know what I was doing yet, but I know that like being in Winnipeg and growing up there and being around the music scene and having the support from my school and from my teachers and from the other people that I did, other artists, I feel like that combined with the long cold winters where you just want to stay inside and play your instrument because there's
Yeah.
nothing else to do.
Yeah, like you just don't want to go out and send a cold in the winters. Like that's why I
Yeah.
don't really would want to live in Canada is because of the winters or upper state New York.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I mean, I love Canada and upper state New York by all means, but the winter I'm not it. I'd rather just stay inside with a fire and wood and just relax and do whatever I want and never go outside.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, who does that? I mean, I rather like kind of like a four seasons where it's not like too hot and not too cold. Like I'm more of a spring and fall person. So it's like if there's no seasons that contain at least two of them, I'm not moving there at
Right.
all.
I mean, I've often thought about like, living in LA. It seems like it's so consistent. And
I
I've heard
know. It's
people, I
always
mean,
like not too hot and not too cold, which I love, or Florida. It's either California or Florida. If I had to move just because of the seasons, those two states would be it. But you produce and co-wrote several tracks on Megan Patrick's album Go Child, as you mentioned before. Can you share your creative process for working on songs like Blood from a Stone and how you set the tone for the record for Megan Patrick's album?
yeah, well, yeah, Megan Patrick, she's so badass. And we had been writing together for a little while at that point when we wrote Blood from a Stone, which turned out to be the song that started this record, Golden Child. Um, Before that, I'd written with her on a song that she released as a single, and it was very different vibe. Um, but yeah, we got together, and it was in my studio here, and she came in and she was talking a lot about, her mom, and the song Blood from a Stone is incredibly personal to her, and it was a really tough subject, and she was feeling like she wanted to tell her story about her relationship with her mom, and it got very vulnerable. And that particular day, I had sort of a guitar part, and that I had actually recorded a little bit of it, just to record the idea and put in like a little organ patch under it kind of thing. And it's what you hear at the beginning of that track on the album. That's still my original part, where it was like I had this idea and it was very brooding and very cinematic and kind of sensitive and vulnerable. And so I pulled that out and I was like, hey, like, while we're on this topic and this is this vibe, like, what do you think of this? How does this hit you? Is this something to you? And so I played her the little piece of the thing I had and the musical idea, and she was like, yeah, let's chase that. So
Mhm.
we so from the musical side of things, the song kind of started from that point, and then we built it off that and filled it out into a full song together. And we wrote this song with a third writer, Emily, who is actually another Canadian now in Nashville, just like me. And yeah, the three of us, sat around the guitar and wrote this song and helped Megan tell her story, basically. And there were some tears shed.
Oh, I'm
um,
sure.
yeah, it was one of those sessions, and she got on the mic right here after we wrote it, and she sang the song, and it was just so emotional. Like it was one of those days, where you just feel emotionally wrecked at the end of it. And I didn't realize it at the time that this was the song that kind of changed things for her, but she has told me after the fact, that it was one that she felt like kind of flipped a switch, and she's like, okay, this is the tone for the record now. This is the start of it. And in fact, the very opening line of Blood from a Stone is I was a golden child. That's the first lyric. And Golden Child is the name of the album. She now has a song on the record that's also called Golden Child itself. It's a different song, but it just goes to show like Blood from a Stone kind of set that tone
Mhm.
before anything else happened.
Yeah, like I feel like with most artists, one specific song that they wrote, but they don't know if they're going to do like an EP or an album. Like it's always depends on how many songs they plan on writing or the first song they wrote. It always depends on the artist and how many songs you depend to write. Like I feel like the first song you record is always the first time or sets the record straight for your EP or album. I know for Keith Urban's my favorite singer. He wrote Straight Line and Messed Up As Me, and that was the two songs that set the record straight for his new album High, which is one of my favorite albums that recently came out. If anyone's interested in listening, please do. It's really good if you're a country music fan out there. Like that's what I realized is more impactful is that most of the time, one or two songs that you wrote or released a few months earlier are most likely 9 times out of 10 most likely to set a tone or the main song at an album.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the tendency to want to tease the album with a single ahead of time that kind of gives people a little sneak peek of what's to come. In
Mhm.
Megan's case, we actually released the second song from the record, which is called Whether You Love Me or Not. That came out, I think it was in June, and she released that one. So it's, a couple months ahead. The actual full record just came out last Friday. Um, So yeah, that song was kind of the opening like foray, and she put that one out there, and it's a bit more of a banger. It's really anthemic, and it's just I love it. It's one of my favorites. And then that was followed by What Shoulder, which is way more rockin' and a bit more raunchy and really shows Megan's real badass side, which I also love.
Yeah, and I listened to that song. It really is a badass song. I'm not just saying
Oh,
that, but it really is. Like, I don't know much about her though, but she in her music though really hits different for different areas of your life, which I love.
it's nice.
So to wrap up this episode, like what's next for you and your career?
Well, I mean, I'm doing a lot of writing right now. It's kind of the season of writing for me. I'm signed to Sony Publishing Nashville, so they're constantly, you know, throwing new artists into my room here with me, and we're trying different things and seeing what clicks. I do have a couple projects I'm working on from a production standpoint right now, but they're not publicly announced yet, so I can't actually talk about them. But stay tuned.
Awesome. I can't wait for it. I'm sure there's going to be tons announced in the next few weeks that I'm so excited for. And I can't wait to see all of that is coming out right now. I'm sure there's tons. But thank you so much for coming on. It means so much. I loved having you on. Like, I haven't had a producer specifically really on the podcast in a hot minute. So I'm so glad to get your standpoint on things and your background for our listeners. But I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to chat with us today. I mean,
Thanks so much. It's been lovely to be here.
so thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, and review, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. And